What's up, fellow tent pros? Welcome to the Pitchin Tents podcast with your host, Brian Bolt.
And Davis West.
How you doing?
I'm actually tired, but I'm glad to be here.
That's good. Davis and I both been under the weather for the past week or so.
Yeah, it's been rough.
That's right. There's a lot of that going around.
But let's just jump on back into this.
Yep.
People will love the podcast, it seems like. I've already been asked, literally we sat down this, and Jose from Grand Central in Tennessee texts me, and he goes, when's the next podcast coming out? It's like, funny you say that, man.
That's right. So like we said before, our plan is to do one of these every 2 weeks, and we've been struggling this week to try to get this one together just because we've been, like I said, under the weather. So starting out, I wanted to just take a minute to mention our good friend, Mike Fitzwater. Many of you know Mike, and certainly well known in the industry. Mike unfortunately lost his battle with cancer a couple weeks back, and just wanted to take a minute to certainly take note of that, pass our condolences to the family. I was fortunate enough to make the trip up last Saturday to the funeral, passed our condolences certainly to Shelly and the kids, and just a fine gentleman that I was lucky enough he and I started on the matcher board together at the same time in 2008, and we're there till each of us left, and then held some duties with the ARA too. But Mike will certainly be missed, and
certainly thoughts and prayers to him and his family, and also, Matt too.
Yep,
Matt Smith,
Matt, and Grady, the whole crowd. They've got some big shoes to fill carrying that forward. But I have no doubt that they will do well with that, and just everybody, please be thinking about them as they make the transition without Mike. That being said, before we get into the meat of this podcast, I think Davis has some news to share.
Well, we can share some positive news.
That's right.
Top Tech's going to be getting a new employee here soon. No, I'm just kidding, y'all. Me and my wife are actually expecting our first child. We've just recently found out that it's a baby boy.
That's right.
So Grant Larkin West will be making his appearance come August. So we'll have another guy to help us put tents up, I guess.
We'll have him bumping around with customers and installs before he's even able to walk, I'm sure.
That's right. Well, there's even talk about him making his first appearance at Matra this year.
Oh, there you go.
He'll be little, but it'll be fun.
August, yeah, 3 months old.
3 months old?
You got to start him early.
Around. Yeah, right. Get him under a tent early so they know what's going on.
That's right. So I do want to say that today's podcast is going to be geared towards safety. And when we talk about safety, we need to make sure everybody understands too, this whole industry has come about, certainly in my time, to really, really embrace a safe work environment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not just on the job site. That's throughout. I see more and more people who carry that throughout their whole business. So today's podcast is going to be more about how to integrate a culture of safety throughout your entire organization. And you probably see some changes too since you were in the field versus today.
Night and day. Going back to when I was installing tents, safety precautions weren't even talked about, Brian. We hardly would get stuff marked before we start staking.
Yep.
It was word of mouth. Hey, I think there's a line right there, so we'll leave that stake out.
Some people said, "You drive a stake? Is it glowing? No, it's probably okay."
Did it come back up?
Or did it
hit
come back
water?
Up? Is there water coming out of the hole? So unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people did it, and that's just staking. But certainly.
Every aspect, though, from loading the truck, there's safety protocols being put in place, to pooling parts, there's safety protocols to be put in place, to even the site visits now.
Yeah, and it's to the point that truly we could get into everything that we have to talk about. And again, we've got a lot of content laid out that we're going to get into over the next few months. But without talking about safety first, we're leaving too much in the rearview mirror. So we really need to talk about that if we're going to be, and not just you and I, if those of us that are at the forefront of training and educating within the industry, if we're going to be talking about those kind of things, we got to live it, and we need to, let's talk about it. Let's get it out there. Let's talk about not just, a lot of people think about safety as PPE, personal protective equipment. Well, that's only part of it, and that's the last line of defense. We're going to talk about that some too. We're talking about culture, right? So that starts from the top down, and I'm talking, and I've seen a lot of it happen over the past several years, but we're talking about ownership that embraces a culture of safety where the employees, and not just the installers, from the front end to the back end, are embracing a safe environment.
Right.
So what are we talking about there? It really starts in our mind with a mindset. People have to understand what it means to operate safely, but we're also talking about a site visit.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely key to do a site visit before you just show up with what you think you need.
And the exception to that will be, and even still not entirely, but the short exception of that would be is if you continually go back to the same venue overhead, you may think you know what's happening time after time, and not saying that you necessarily have to do a site visit, but somebody needs to pay attention when they get on site that things at that job site were what they were last time.
You can't take for granted just going through the motions.
No.
You have to be aware, alert of not only yourself, but everybody else around you.
Yep.
And the elements around you.
That's right. So I say it starts with obviously an internal culture that everybody embraces that, but as part of that is not just the installers, but even the salespeople.
Right.
So somebody's going to go sell that job. What do they need to do? They need to go out to the site and see what's happened, or what the site conditions are is a better way to say it.
The materials you need are going to be dictated by that first original site.
Correct. And how the job is priced, right? How many times have you gone to a job site and you take what you think are the right materials based on let's say it's a tent. You got tables, chairs, linens, whatever else you're going to put up. But let's talk about the tent. You got a specific tent that you got to put in. You get to the site and it's nothing like you envisioned.
Google Earth is great, but it doesn't show you topo.
Well, things change, right?
And I mean,
and it doesn't show
you. Plenty of times that I've gotten to a site visit and realized, or not the site visit, actual install.
Yeah.
When the site visit was already supposed to prior to have happened, and get there and it's on a slope that now I need adjustable bases for that,
or you
didn't bring.
Yeah. Or you were going to do a floor? Well, what's the pitch of the job site? Does the flooring that you're going to put up, does it take that into consideration? How far is it from the truck, right? How far or how close can you get to the job site? Ultimately, those are all things that can affect your safety,
right?
Because getting that equipment in and out may make you sometimes do some things you may not have done otherwise, just because you have potentially further to get to the site or over and around. Who knows what?
There's been countless times that I have personally cut corners just because it's easier to do it this other way.
That's right.
And not even thought about what could have happened. And there's, like I said, countless times that I've done that and looked back and said, that was stupid.
Yep. And then that's what we're trying to get out of, right? And we need to, as an industry, we've got to embrace that. And I always say, too, if you start to make concessions on safety and something goes wrong, it doesn't just affect you and your company. It affects all of us, because you know what happens when there's a claim, then all of our insurance rates go up, right?
Right.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't affect just those installers who are on site. That's my point. It could be much, much deeper than that.
Like you said, it's a reflection of the whole industry, really.
It is. And I always tell people, too, when the news crew shows up, they're not coming to tell you did a good job.
Ever.
Right?
Ever.
They are coming to explain, or they're coming to expose us all.
They're coming to show you what bad things happened that day.
So we don't want that. So again, starting with the site visit, that starts with your inside people, and whoever's selling that job needs to go out and familiarize themselves with the site, document it. We actually have, and I'm sitting here looking at our tent school book that we put out. There's a template in there, and there's other ones available to everyone throughout the industry too. But we have a template that we recommend that you use just for documenting the things that are there on the site. Address, certainly obstructions. And let's talk about those for a second. So when we talk about obstructions, everybody thinks, well, what's under the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Not that easy.
Here's a good one. What's overhead?
That's right. That's the easiest thing to look at when you get on site, is to look up. And I tell installers that all the time when we're doing training. Your number one thing needs to be, when you get on the site and the area where the tent's going to be, not just the footprint of the tent, even that route in and out where you're going to be moving poles around. What's it look like? We had a job years ago, and I tell this one at tent school all the time. We had a job, and it was in eastern North Carolina, and there was a concrete pad, and they had a 40 by 100 pole tent up. So the first center pole is 20 feet in from the end. Well, 14 inches of snow took that down, and they replaced it after conversation here. We got them to replace that with a gable-ended Future Track, which is our gable-ended version of a ketered frame tent. So what happens is, and this is where video would help, is to draw this out, but so essentially visualize a power line diagonally over the tent that intersects the 40-foot end of the tent right in the middle. So what that means is
right where the belly is.
So that 20-foot center pole was 20 feet inside of that, still too close for me to feel comfortable about, but it wasn't in contact or even in the proximity of that power line. The problem is now I'm putting a gable-ended tent there. Now I've got a crown cluster at the center point of that 40-foot end directly overhead, and now we're in conflict. That was the thing that nobody who had sold that job even looked at. So what I did was I stopped the job, and that's what I want every installer or anybody that's out on the tent site to know. Even
you have the power to stop
everybody needs to have the authority and the leeway to stop a job site if you encounter some sort of unsafe conditions.
Sometimes it's going to be hard to have that conversation. A lot of times, whoever you tell that to is going to tell you, no, this is going to have to happen.
Exactly what happened with us. So when I first told them, I said, this tent is not moving forward. We're not putting any framework together, not even starting the install until I have somebody to either move that line or give me authority that the power has been cut from it and it's not going to come back on while this tent's up. So we ended up stopping the job site for a few hours. I can't remember the exact time frame, doesn't matter, but we stopped the job site until we could get a person from the local power company to come out and certify to me, whoever's leading that job needs to know that that power had been cut from that. So we do not have to worry about it coming back on. They put a lockout tag out on it so they can't flip it back on after the tent's in place. That was the only way that goes forward. And we also had it in writing from them that they were, not only had they turned that power off, they were going to move that line. They couldn't do it that day.
Good.
But they gave us the certification that we were okay to move forward.
But everybody has to have, it's really called leadership. You have to be able to say, hey, this is going to make some people mad, but this event is not as important as my people's lives.
The people on site, it was at a winery. The people at the winery did not like me stopping that job site because they had an event for the weekend. I said, and we ended up getting the tent up that day, but I told them, I said, none of this is worth losing people over. We all have families we're responsible to.
And they get in that tunnel head frame because and I get it, because their back's up against the wall and they have an event that they have to, get through and perform for the people that are paying them to put the event up.
Yep.
But like you said, it's not worth somebody's life, but they get blinded by the fact that, hey, this hasn't been a problem before. We just need this to get up and done because later tonight, we've got people coming here.
That's right. Sorry. Yeah. This is why this stuff matters on the front end. Had we known ahead of time, we could have taken some steps to alleviate that. We didn't have that.
Did you tell them that? Sorry about your luck.
No, I didn't say it that way. But we did stop the job. We got what we needed in order to move forward. So that's overhead. Then certainly underground, we talk about that too.
Go ahead.
Well, let me go back. One last thing about overhead is people think that a tent pole may need to touch a line. That's not true. It will arc to it. And people say, well, how far away can I be? One thing, I'm not answering that.
I was about to say, let's not figure it out.
No, one thing, I don't know that. And the other thing is, I don't know what the formula is. Doesn't matter at all. It's a function of how much power is going through that line.
If it looks like it could be close, it's probably close enough.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to touch on that here. I don't know what that number is. The biggest thing is if there's overhead obstructions at all between the footprint of the tent and whatever that travel route is.
Bring it to attention.
Yep. You gotta understand that something needs to be dealt with. Okay, so let's talk about underground. So when we talk about underground utilities, first of all, everybody that's listening to this has the ability to call 811. That's the locator service that most, if not all, utilities pay into that. So it's a free call for you. So you call 811 and you do not have to, you don't have to pay for that service. And they're going to mark the things that are their responsibility. So typically that's up to the meter. What happens behind that, if there are still, let's say, irrigation lines or personal power lines,
personal stuff,
buried power lines, cable.
They're not going to locate those.
Yeah, they're not locating that stuff. They're locating up to the portion of that they own. But they do that free of charge.
Why don't you go ahead and mention which ones they do locate?
Okay, so it's going to be power, water, gas.
Fiber optic?
Yep. And then, do you know the colors of those? I can tell you, red's the bad, red's the worst one, right? Which power.
That's right.
That's right. And then
you got your green.
Green is sewage. That's the smelly one.
Then you got your
orange. Orange is the one that typically gets billed to you by the hour or by the minute that it's down because that's data. And that's, it's not necessarily always as deadly maybe, but it's a big interference. You drive a stake through a data line, there's a lot of people affected, and nowadays that's costing everybody's running off of some sort of
everybody's
internet.
Running data
now. Underground.
Back in the day, that wouldn't have been a big issue.
No. And then, of course, yellow is gas. That's another bad one, right? So you don't want to run any stakes anywhere close to a gas line. And I'm not going to get into it here because I think it's different in different places, but you have a certain, just because they mark that line on the ground doesn't mean you can drive a stake in right beside of it.
Right. It's like an approximate, this is the line.
Yeah.
I think it's 2. Is it 2 feet?
I want to say it's 3, but like I said, I don't necessarily want to get into here. It's like 8. I don't remember exactly what it is. I should know that.
Don't hold us to it, but it's within that margin you want to stay away.
And they tell you that there's a margin of error with their equipment. When they put those painted lines on the ground, then you need to stay a certain distance outside of even that line. You can't just go and drive a stake right beside it. So we're typically talking about 40 inches into the ground, 36 to 40 inches in the ground with a 1-inch stake. That's the number one item most people are going to be using. So we said red, yellow, orange, green. Those are the primary. I will say this, when we're talking about laying out a tent, only because we're talking about colors on the ground, this has really not what I wanted to necessarily get into, but please paint. You heard all those colors. Please paint the area that you're going to be putting the tent up. If you're going to lay out an area and you want somebody to see where that is, use white. Yeah. White paint.
If you're laying out the stake line for a pole tent, that's white.
I've seen 100 times where people take orange can of paint because it's fluorescent orange. It's bright. Well, you know what? That's the same color as the data line.
That's right.
So white is technically considered the proposed excavation area or the area of excavation. So anywhere you're going to be doing your work, you need to mark that in white.
And that's really important to remember because oftentimes the people that go out and do the site visit are going to lay out the stake line, and then their guys are going to come in the next day and put those stakes in. So if you don't have it laid out in white and you go and you just mark it in some other color, that could create a lot of confusion for your guys when they get there and holding the job back.
So specifically, we're talking about as it relates to safety and creating a culture of safety, your employees have to understand what that means to operate safely. That's your salespeople all the way through your install team. So from front to back, top to bottom, we need to make sure that those people are properly trained. So there's a lot of ways that you can get trained these days, probably more so than ever before.
There's safety classes, it seems like, every other month.
Yep.
Between Matra, ATA,
yep,
ARA online educational courses.
Yep.
You have our tent school that we do every year. We
manufacturers tent school.
How long do we spend? About an hour on safety?
Yeah, this is a lot of the content that we're covering here. We cover it in our tent school. We start with it for the first 45 minutes, the dedicated time, all groups together. We end up breaking out into multiple groups. But day one, before we ever start, we have everybody together so they can hear it from one source in terms of not how we want to operate tent school safely.
Our expectations, too.
Expectations of safety, and then ultimately how they are going to operate in a safe environment when they get back. So we're not talking about just what we're doing at tent school, but how they're going to operate
when they get home.
Yep. So again, to reiterate, you got the American Rental Association has its own training, the ATA, the Advanced Textiles Association, and then MATRA, the Manufacturers and Tent Renters Association. Each of those they're tied in now to education and actually a certification program that each of them can host. And there's a safety component, there's installation parts and all that kind of stuff. But that's one place where you can get educated is from the trade associations within the industry. Then we have the manufacturers training sessions, which I can't speak for everybody else, but we've got 24 years into a tent school that's every year. And again, we're going to talk about safety, and then we're going to talk about when we get into the guts of how we install things, we're going to talk about how we do those safely. Our goal is not just to get the tent up. Our goal is to make sure, I tell people all the time, you got family that in most cases want to see you come back.
Right? In most cases.
So, but you've got to operate in a safe condition.
Something people often forget, I feel like, is not only do your actions have a direct impact on yourself, but it directly impacts everybody else that's in your life.
That's right. Unfortunately, there have been instances in this industry where people didn't go home at the end of the day.
And I know of one of those that you told me about.
It's awful.
I've shared at tent school every year about picking a tent up and just carrying it and walking it right up underneath the line.
And the same thing happened in that situation. I don't want to get into the specifics of that one, but I can tell you that was a situation where the center pole didn't necessarily, and that was on what everybody calls a high peak or a flying center pole type high peak tent. The power doesn't have to touch that pole. Like I said before, it will arc. And what ultimately happened with that one is it arced to the pole, went through the cables, and you got one person on each of 4 legs, and you had multiple people that day that didn't go home. It's brutal. And so we don't take any of that lightly. That's why it's worth us spending some time on this episode to talk about this stuff, is because especially power, gas, those kind of things are very unforgiving.
That's right.
So as far as where this all begins, again, we touched briefly on the site survey. That's part of it, and getting everybody on the same page. So let's talk about a site survey, because again, since that's kind of where it all starts, one of the things a site survey does, it lets it, and I would encourage anybody that's listening to this to have, and we have them available to you, that you're welcome to take our basic general site survey checklist and what I have is a sketch. I would always encourage people who are doing a site survey to make a sketch, carry grid paper with you, whatever you need to do.
And take pictures.
And take lots of photos. All that needs to be, here we run, like all of our orders, we have a main PDF, we call it. So it's just a main PDF that's attached to the order. There's no reason you can't do that with your own order in your organization, to have all the pertinent information in one spot. So if the installers need to look at it, show them that within that file, pull what needs to happen, send that with them and say, this is the site you're going to encounter when you get there, but take the time to do it. And just because it's a lower end job doesn't mean that you can't do that. I've heard people say, well, I don't have enough money wrapped up into that job. Yeah, we're coming at it as a manufacturer, but also maybe you need to put a little bit in there to cover your time to go out there and check that site. I don't know. That's how organizations have to help.
Just a quick story. I did a site survey yesterday for tent at a local spot here. And something to keep in mind on your site survey is, while you're on the survey with said customer, you are the expert there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So you dictate to them where that tent can safely go, even if it's not what they had envisioned.
They're not just hiring you to bring them the equipment. They're hiring you for what you know and your expertise.
It's what you do. Yeah.
That's right. So make sure that the equipment that you're using when you're putting up a tent, and we're looking at it from the tent perspective, but make sure that the equipment that you use is suited to the location and the function of what's going to be happening with that event. So that's a good place to document that stuff in the site. In other words, guys don't need to be taking a bunch of stuff they don't need, but they also need to make sure that what they do need is on the truck. And I know there are a lot of people who handle this in different ways, and a lot of the stuff stays on, tent jacks or dollies or ground covers. Some of that stuff stays on the truck, but make sure that what you have going to the job site is suited to the location, the function of the event.
And the weather.
Weather's a big thing. We're going to talk about that in a second too. The other thing about the site survey it does is it organizes the information for clear communication, and it serves as a place for you to document the points on the things on the site that need to be handled, and a place that you can communicate not only with your client or customer, but also with your own internal people, right? So it's a good place to have all that information in one spot. It also serves as a record of the transaction. So in the event that you end up having a dispute or something that comes up later, you can have a place say, oh, this was documented here, that this is not the way that we were going to handle that. And, maybe something that you want to talk about with the customer later on down the road. We talked about obstructions. Primarily, you're going to have overhead and underground obstructions, but also the location of the tent and where it's going to go may cause you to make sacrifices in terms of safety simply because of where the tent is. Again, that's what the site survey should help you with before you ever get to that point. You mentioned weather.
We are all weathermen at this point.
It's true.
It's what you need to pay the most attention to, in my mind.
I would doubt that there's anybody that's listening to this podcast that doesn't have a weather app on their phone.
I have 3. Right? Yeah.
Which ones do you use?
I use Weather Underground.
Yep,
which
same.
is basically my primary.
Let's talk about it. Let me talk about Weather Underground real quick before you go on.
All right.
So just so everybody knows, Weather Underground, the way that it works is through a network of individual personal weather stations. Obviously, they got to meet certain requirements, but that's a network of independent weather stations, which creates this blanket or network of information. And I've found it to be pretty stinking reliable. Go ahead.
AccuWeather back.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my last one, I have a wind app.
There's one called Windy.
And I originally got it way back when I played a lot of golf.
Yep.
Because I could use it and make notes of where the wind would come off the right or the left or wherever it was coming. And it'd give me an accurate depiction of it. And since I've been working on tents, that's actually been one of the main apps I use.
It's usually the biggest weather condition we have to deal with is wind.
Especially
more so than the other stuff we can a lot of times work through, right?
Correct.
We don't have a lot of...
But wind can just come out of nowhere.
It totally can. And we have a lot of customers who don't want to work in really cold climates. So they can see that. You get a little bit heads up. Wind can change quickly. And that's the biggest detriment to many tent installations. And we're going to talk about that as anchoring also, because you got to make sure that you anchor it for the worst case scenario, not for just what you think is going to happen, because I've seen it plenty of times.
For the worst.
You do. And I've seen plenty of times where you get on the job site and things change within an hour to 2 hours of installing a tent.
Plan for the worst and hope for the best. I mean, it goes back to that another example, ATA one year in Florida. I had to pre-strap the tent down as we jacked it up because of the wind.
That happens. We have customers that we tell all the time, too. They want to know how to combat that because I've got to get the tent up. Well, there's a couple of things you can do within reason. Stay safe. And number one is making sure that tent doesn't fly away, right? And we're going to...
That's the main concern.
Yep.
Because once that thing goes...
Well, yeah.
She's gone.
Everybody thinks they can hold on to one, too. But
try it. You won't try it but once.
Yep. While we're talking about weather, let's talk about quickly, too. ARA put out a document, and I think it's changed a little bit over time, but it was a statement of best practices of emergency evacuation planning for tenant events. And that's a document that the ARA took the time to compose where you, being the tent rental company, can leave this document with your end user, and it lets them kind of document what their evacuation plan is going to be. That's not to say that the tent rental company is certainly not responsible for executing that evacuation, because they're probably not going to be on site. You're going to go in, install the tent, go on about your business, your day. They have the event, you come back to get it. But what happens if things go bad while that event's going on? The end user has to be made aware of what needs to happen. When the weather really goes bad, where do people go?
And this document's available to all ARA members?
Yeah, it is.
You said ARA, right?
It is for ARA members. They may have changed it. They may have changed it a little bit over time.
I feel like everybody should be using that.
Right. So
it covers your butt.
It's available.
What in the world?
That's right. It's available. So
I didn't even know about this.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to bookmark it and start telling people.
So that's, again, statement of best practices of emergency evacuation planning on tenant events. And that, again, that's through the American Rental Association. And I believe there's a new name, and I think they may have reworked it through Rental U maybe since. But
I'm sure it's evolved.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sure it just didn't disappear.
Yep. So that's talking about weather. Then wind specifically, we touched on it. I'm just kind of going through some points here. The wind changes everything, right? We've already touched on that.
It can even dictate, depending on when the event is, the wind and weather can dictate what kind of tent you even want to put up.
Sure. We talk about access to a job site too, and that was a little bit to do with the location we talked about a bit ago. But just being able to get to the site, like for instance, what happens when you show up on a job site and it goes up on the third floor? Typically, that stuff is communicated because that's really...
If you show up to the job site and they're like, hey, we want to put it up there now. Not sure that's
I'm sure crazier things have happened. Again, that's all just needs to be communicated through the site visit and checklist. Let's talk about anchoring. When we're talking about stability of these tents, frame tents, pole tents, it doesn't matter which, the anchors for the site have to be suitable to the job and the task at hand. We have people
Can you say that again? Because that was great.
The anchors that you're using, whether it be stakes, ballast, whatever, have to be suitable to the task at hand on what, in other words, you got a concrete pad, you're not going to drive stakes through it, so you got to ballast it, okay? How do you ballast it? That's going to be a whole nother session on its own that we'll get to later. I'm talking about specifically from safety, and safety in terms of keeping that tent where you wanted it. That tent better be where when I get back to take that tent back down, it better be where I left it.
That's right.
That's the idea. So that can be stakes. Again, that could be ballast. I've seen auger stakes used when it's sandy soil. There's a lot of, there are a ton of different ways to ultimately keep these tents stable. And I would encourage, we don't need to get into specifics right now of all the different ways. That's a topic for another day. But I would encourage anybody listening to this, talk to your manufacturers or get involved in the industry associations, organizations, because inevitably at every conference I've been to that I can think of over the past 5 to 10 years, anchoring has been covered in one way or another.
Well, it's basically the foundation of our industry.
It's true.
And without good anchoring, it ain't going to last long.
And it's got to, like I said, you want it to be when you go back to get it where it was when you set it up.
And everybody has some kind of anchoring study, stake pull-out study that you can get your hands on in terms of.
And we have that too from samples. When we first started doing the tow truck way back when. Pete McVeigh, everybody knows Pete, has been involved in our tent school. I've been with Top Tech 20 going on 21 years, and I've never done, I did one. I've only done one in that time without Pete involved. And every year we hire a tow truck to come in and simulate Mother Nature so we can show people in black and white what different staking configurations will actually hold an average ground. And we compile that data over the years. We've got a lot of that because we haven't always been in the same spot. So we want to know how it varies from one place to another.
If anybody ever catches Pete out there, ask him about that J-hook that held the most. He'll know what you're talking about.
As a quick tangent, years ago, and Pete loves to tell this one, that was back then, it was hidden Hickory Tavern, our old location. He would come in, and the day that he got there, the day before tent school, he would come in and we would put the different staking configurations in the ground for the tow truck to pull.
Just get it ready.
Right?
Yeah,
and that's right. So one year I told him, I said, Pete, don't worry about that. I'll have it ready when you get here, so you don't need to worry about it. So so he always starts out with a J-hook, 18-inch J-hook stake.
And normally holds like
and he'll take it out, and he'll literally grab it by his hand and pull it out and tell everybody, if you're using this stake, you need to go find another industry because I don't want you in mine, essentially.
The only thing you hold down with those is sidewalls.
And they might hold 100 pounds normally.
Maybe. I think they were like 80 pounds this year.
And they don't hold anything, right?
Anyway,
so I said, Pete, don't worry about it. I'll have it ready for you when you get here. So unbeknownst to him, I took an 18-inch J-hook stake, took it in our metal shop, cut it in half, and welded a 3-inch flute on the bottom and screwed it into the ground. So when he went to pull it with the tow truck, it went to...
When he started with his hand, he was like,
it went 500.
Wow, this is good clay.
It went 500 pounds, 1,000,
dynamometer
1,500, and it was still in the squat in the back of the truck. And
he's standing there shaking his head, wondering what's going on.
And he said, let's come back to that one. Then I finally told him what I did. And see, he ended up putting it on a plaque and putting it on a plaque and sending it back to me. So it's
hilarious.
Gotta have a little bit of fun with it. So we talked about anchoring stability. And building codes, that's got to be more and more of a thing. I don't necessarily want to cover a lot with that here, but more and more tents are being required to be certified now, which ultimately plays into the safety and the integrity of the tents that we're all
And I'm sure that varies from state to state too, so it's important to really be on top of what your state requires and expects.
And there's a movement afoot in the industry right now to ultimately get, hopefully, a national code where we're all playing by the same rules. I think that's going to be imperative long term.
I mean,
because everybody's having to. You can go 10 minutes down the road and have to play by the rules,
right?
And then fire regulations. We always talk about flame certifications. Just about any reputable manufacturer of anything vinyl in our industry now will provide certificate of flame resistance in our case, it's everything that we build, right? So every piece of material, every panel
has an individual serial number and an individual flame cert.
And flame cert. So we talked a little bit about 811. I don't know that we need to get back into that necessarily. The biggest thing about that is take the time to call it, get your site.
I mean, it's free.
Evaluate.
Use it.
And then, we did years ago when we were doing tent school.
I mean,
at the old location with tent school, even when we started doing it here at our current location, I called 811 and had them mark it. I ultimately got our own internal maintenance guys to go and map that out. So we didn't necessarily, they wanted it for their own information because it's on site.
Of course.
So there's no reason you can't do that at your own job site. And so if you have 811 comes out, they map it out, put that in your site survey sketch.
Attach it to a file so that you always have it for that venue.
And that doesn't mean it will never change. So when I know I did the first time I ever did tent school at our place, I called 811. I called them the following year and they said, you've already had it done. I said, no, just humor me. It's a free service list, because I told them what I'm trying to do too is educate people on what the different colors mean and all that. So they did that anyway. But if you're going to have an event at the same location year after year, go ahead and take time to mark that stuff out.
Well, it's just common sense too, because you can pass that down throughout the history of the company too, and you never have to wonder.
And none of that supersedes the fact that it could change year after year. So that's another
like anything,
thing.
Just keep updated your records.
Sure. Let's talk about PPE, personal protective equipment. A lot of people, when we talk about being safe, that's the first thing people think of in our industry. Personal protective equipment could be hard hats, gloves, safety shoes or hard-toed shoes, steel-toed boots, etc., glasses, ear protection, running whackers and that kind of stuff. That's all good. And we're going to talk about those individually. But what people have to understand is none of that takes the place of having a mindset of operating safely.
I was about to say, you can have all that stuff on and still operate in a manner that is very flagrant.
Yeah.
And none of that stuff helps you anyway.
No. So it doesn't matter, if you're inviting getting hit in the head with a pole, don't feel like just because you got a hard hat on, then you can do whatever you want to do.
I have seen somebody get hit in the head with it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's brutal.
No doubt. Proper use of PPE requires training. You can't just take a hard hat and throw it on your head. I've seen it happen before, specifically at tent school.
I was about to say, I've seen somebody wearing one of our hard hats without the internal suspension system in it.
That's correct.
It's just a shell.
And we have gotten to where, because I just assume everybody knows how to use a hard hat. Just so everybody knows, the way a hard hat works is it actually relies on that suspension system that sits on your head and the void created between it and the shell on the outside. So that suspension system typically clips in to the hard shell, but it creates that void between the webbing that sits on your head and the shell on the outside. And that's what actually absorbs the impact and protects you. Just to say that you have PPE doesn't mean that you don't need to be trained on how to use it
properly.
Yeah, how to properly use it. Right. I've seen earplugs. People barely put earplugs in instead of squeezing them and inserting them like they should be.
Might as well not wear them.
Or you need safety glasses. I'm gonna wear my sunglasses.
Not even close to the same thing.
No. They take different impacts. So just because you have sunglasses don't mean that they're up to the task at hand.
High-res clothing.
That's another one, that a vest is another huge thing that I've seen, again, over the course of doing this.
I think that might be one of the most important things, especially with these bigger tents now and people using larger pieces of equipment.
Yep.
You need to be able to see your guys.
That's correct. And then make it consistent. When we talk about setting culture, it's not a culture if you're not doing it consistently.
And honestly, me personally, if I owned an event company, I would make it a requirement. I would make sure you had it in your truck every morning before you left. And if I pulled up on a job site and you weren't using PPE properly and not practicing safe install tactics, we'll have a long chat when we get back.
And I have seen, not long ago, I was in a customer visit, and before I could go into their warehouse, which I've done 1,000 times or more, before I could go into the warehouse, I had put a safety vest on before I could go out inside. And that's company policy and that's culture.
I'll say the same thing. There's a company that when I started used to not do that. It's evolving.
That's right.
Because now you go in there and you get a vest and safety glasses to walk back there.
That's right. Before you can do any of this stuff. And it makes just good business sense. And in a lot of cases, it's the law. OSHA's going to require that you have certain PPE on.
It's just good practice, man. I mean, yeah, sometimes it looks a little goofy, but daggum, you know what else looks goofy? Stitches across your forehead from getting hit with a pole.
So one of the stats we were given some time back that there are about 5,000 injuries annually that cause people to be off of work for more than 3 days in accidents involving vehicles. Again, to your point about high vis in and around the workplace, and the majority of those things can be prevented. And it's ultimately just becomes a way of life.
Yeah, it's not just getting hurt out on the job site. You see how some people operate in their warehouse. They'll need to hang a chandelier from the rafters. What do? You stand on the forks of a forklift and get ridden up there. It's all the same thing.
We've seen it.
And I've done it. So yeah. I know. not good practice.
There's a lot that's changed, thankfully, over time, that people are not operating that way like they had been. Not to say it doesn't happen, because it does, but we even here internally have our own policy that we wear hard hats anytime we're working overhead with poles. That doesn't mean that you're okay on a pole tent, but you got to wear it. You don't have to wear them on a pole tent, but you do on a frame tent. No, you're dealing with side poles, center poles, things flying around. Even up until the point that the tent is anchored down, we will wear our hard hats. And that's our own internal policy. I would challenge most people to do the same.
I've gotten hit multiple times with poles on a pole tent, and it was from somebody else just carrying them around.
Oh, yeah.
Not even installing the tent, just, 5 on their shoulder. Somebody calls their name. They turn
spin
around.
Bam, you get hit. Yeah, in the head or right in the face.
Yeah.
As far as hearing protection, that's another one. Nowadays with whackers, I mean, you've been around job sites where people are just wailing away with either 10-aughts, whacker, or whatever, mechanical stake drivers.
And I think it's important to point this out, too. Your AirPods don't count as hearing protection.
Call them sunglasses.
Okay.
Right? Same idea.
And here's another point. Hearing protection should only be worn, in my opinion, when you're using a whacker or some loud tool.
Yeah, because you still need to be able to hear. You need to be able to hear.
And you got AirPods in blasting music, you ain't hearing nobody.
Nope. And to me, AirPods and smoking on a tent site go hand in hand. Yeah. I don't think there's a place for either one.
You might as well drink out there, too.
That's right.
That's
probably happening, too.
Well,
so...
That's the ride home.
Yeah. When it comes to PP or hearing protection, and some people prefer muffs, some people want like the small foam earplugs. I don't know that there's a reason for one over the other. Ultimately, you want to protect their hearing. The biggest thing that you need to know is if you're having to yell to talk to the person around you, you probably need hearing protection.
Mm-hmm. You ever got one of them stuck in your ear?
No. Sorry.
I had to go get it taken out by a doctor. I swear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Starting to see a common theme.
Yeah, don't be around me.
So either muffs or earplugs, your choice on that, but please use something. Safety glasses. Sunglasses don't do it. There are ANSI standards. That's I think it's American National Safety Institute, that there are certain requirements for safety glasses to take certain kinds of impacts, and that's what you want to be wearing.
Did they make sunglasses that hold to that standard, though? Just out of curiosity.
I would ask an optometrist. I don't know.
I wonder if you could get some lenses put in some coasters.
You probably could. So that's kind of the long and short of it when it comes to...
Gloves ain't on there.
No, gloves aren't. We don't. And what we're doing is we're going through.
Shameless plug. I can tell you why the gloves aren't on ours. We Dremel our sharp edges on our poles. You shouldn't cut your edges. Cut yourself hand on us.
I hear you. There's plenty of pinch points, et cetera, and all that kind of stuff. So the biggest thing about the safety equipment when it gets to PPE is it needs to be specific to the task at hand. So steel-toed boots are another one that we don't necessarily have on a list that we're looking at right now. But those steel-toed boots, if you're running around throwing stakes out, taking things off of...
Dropping stuff in the trucks.
Oh, yeah. Moving stuff around with a forklift, get a pallet set on your foot. The variables are endless in terms of how that could be.
Just real quick, I know we touched on hard hats. There is kind of a trend with the hard hats right now, it seems.
I have heard some of that. Tell me about it.
And so originally, a hard hat was a hard hat. Heck, I've even seen a cowboy hat hard hat. But it seems like, and
as long as it has that suspension system and a hard outside shell, that was always kind of what it was,
correct.
Right?
That's
now
correct.
Tell me what's happening.
It seems like the industry is moving towards, and a lot of companies are requiring their guys that wear hard hats to have chin straps.
How many times you've been on a job site, then, especially in cold weather, somebody's got a stocking cap hat and then a hard hat barely sitting up on top of it. What happens? They bend over?
Yeah, it just falls right off. And, these big structures, these guys are climbing on top of the structure. They don't need to be up there without something to secure that hard hat down.
And I've seen those with integrated safety shields. Right.
I was just looking at one that Chris Bugsby sent me that he said he was going to get. It's the same ones they passed out at Matra this past year.
Yeah.
You can integrate those with headsets so you can talk to your guy while he's up there. That's wild.
And the nuts. But that's how far it's come to allow us to operate safely yet comfortably.
I think a lot of it, too, stems from people starting to put more of an emphasis on safety.
Oh, sure.
Because it used to just be fly by the seat of your pants, get the job done, and try not to hurt yourself.
And now you have, not only do they have this equipment, but it's pretty stinking comfortable.
Yeah, and sleek looking too. I'm not gonna lie. The new ones look kind of cool.
So that's a long and short of it. Again, the biggest thing that we wanted everybody to gather from this is to promote creating a culture of safety in your company. It's a requirement for all of us to operate safely.
It certainly is a requirement here. Let me ask you this. What's the down part of being safer? Nothing?
No.
Spend a little bit more time, at the end of the day, like I said, there is not a job or an ounce of money for a contract to get that's worth one of your guys or yourself's sake.
Depending on who the person is, I've seen where people fool themselves into thinking they're going to be able to move quicker because they don't have that stuff. That's not necessarily true. I hate gloves like nobody's business. I despise gloves. But you know what? When I'm on a tent site and I'm either putting things together or moving stakes around, things that can, and that was the other thing I just happened to think, total tangent. We talk about eye protection a lot. Don't forget when you're driving stakes, pieces of steel can come off of those stakes just from the impact. That's another great opportunity to put eye protection on when you're driving stakes. Anyway, I meant to say that earlier.
I'll be honest. I'll be the first one to tell you, I hate wearing a hard hat. I hate it.
Yep.
It feels to me like my head weighs 1,000 pounds and it's just bulky at that point. Yep. I really do run into everything on the tent when I have a hard hat on, but I've also had to have stitches in the top of my head before.
Let it happen one time and I guarantee it will change your mind. And the problem is now, a lot of us are not sole proprietors. We're actually working for somebody who's got to pay our insurance. So when we get hit in the head, then all of a sudden the people who are writing our checks are getting stung too because their insurance rates are going up.
Not operating safely has an impact not just on yourself, but everybody else involved.
Yep. I think we've said that about every way that we know to say that. So you got anything else before we kind of wrap it up?
I think I'm good.
Anyway, thanks to everybody for tuning in.
You're on the road next week,
We appreciate it. Yep. I'll be on the road next week.
Where you headed?
I'm going to Florida.
All right. So all you people down in Florida, Brian's coming down to Florida.
I'll be
Brandon.
there. I'll be there for the week. Yeah.
I'll be around South Carolina next week.
Good. So this is just that time of year. A lot of us are on the road and helping people with installs of newly acquired tents, et cetera. And I'll be taking my hard hat with me. How about that?
Keep mine in my truck everywhere I go now.
That's right. So anyway, with that said, we're signing off and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Stay safe. Wear those hard hats.
Later, taters.